Hello and good afternoon. My name is Andrea Nelson and I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research here at Glasgow Caledonian University. And whilst we get everybody online, all sitting in the right place, comfortable with a cup of tea, because this is a hybrid event, and whilst we all get comfortable, I thought I'd just do some of the housekeeping events. First of all, thank you everybody for being here, whether you're here in person or online. We are using a Zoom webinar platform today, so don't worry if you're concerned about what you're looking like on camera. You don't need to, because you're not going to be on camera. So I'm sorry about that. But for your information, today's talk will be recorded both for the university's YouTube, so if you need to leave early, don't worry, you'll get it, but also so that we can enjoy it later as well. Now, there's going to be obviously a standard professorial lecture. I'm not sure anything will be standard in terms of professorial lectures with our presenter here today, though. But there will also be an opportunity for questions at the end. Now, because we've got a bit of a hybrid event, of course, we will have questions from people in the room. We've got some pre-submitted questions for which many thanks. And there's an opportunity, if you are online, to submit your questions. So if you have a question now or one pops up during the event, then please use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen. Don't put it in the chat because it may not be seen, because we've got some technical assistants here, but they can't do 4 or 5 screens at once, just at the moment. So use the Q&A functionality to submit your question, and then we will try our best to put it to Seb at the end. Please do use the chat area for general comments, feedback and thoughts throughout the day, and we'll collate those as well. Don't worry about remembering all of that. We'll get that to you as well during the session today as part of the event. Now that we've done a little bit of housekeeping, a very, very warm welcome to everybody, whether you are family, friends, colleagues, collaborators, or people who just wanted to see what was happening. And welcome to this inaugural lecture for Seb Chastin. Now, Seb's inaugural lecture was obviously delayed slightly by COVID. But they do say that good things come to those who wait. And I'm really looking forward to today. But first of all, I have a formal role, and that is to make an introduction to Professor Seb Chastin. So on behalf of Glasgow Caledonian University, welcome everybody to this professorial lecture. It looks like we've people from Australia, North and South America, Africa, Asia, and all over Europe, both in the room and online, where we've got a really healthy audience. So welcome. Now, young Seb was born some time ago in Marseille in the south of France to Annick and Bernard, who I believe are joining us online. So welcome. Marseille is twinned with our good city of Glasgow, so this was obviously meant to be. The melting pot of Marseille also has had a strong influence on Seb. It's a bit like Glasgow, really, isn't it, Marseille, on a day like today? Seb describes himself as born on Mars, finely tuned in Glasgow. And I'm sure those of us who've lived in Glasgow a long time know you can knock a few edges off somebody if you're in Glasgow long enough. Now, from Seb's bio, you'll see he's a polymath, i.e. he gets into lots of things, but he does that with a passion for breaking silos and transgressing disciplinary boundaries. He studied a diplôme universitaire, my French is rubbish, Diplôme universitaire of technology in measurement, data analysis and signal processing at the University of Marseille, followed by a BSc and MSc in applied physics, which he gained with distinction. During that time, he enlisted in one of the very first waves of Erasmus exchange and ended up in Newcastle in the Department of Engineering and Computing, working on voice recognition. It was such a great experience that he became hooked on British culture and British research. And as soon as he was able to, moved back to the UK to undertake a PhD in physics at the University of Sussex in a legendary low temperature physics lab headed by Douglas Brewer. This is where he met his wife and soulmate Josie, who's here with us today. After his PhD, his spirit of adventure and insatiable curiosity propelled him out of the lab to work in geophysics, where he could be outside in that their real world. He took positions at the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge, spending months in the field before moving to the University at Oxford, and finally to the Geoscience Department at Edinburgh University, where he spent 5 years managing large European projects in Iceland, Antarctica, and Greenland on earthquakes, volcanology, and glaciology. So he makes the Earth move, he really does. So by this time, son Marius had arrived, and it was time to stop gallivanting to cold places for months. So he quit academia, took time off to be with Marius, and retrained as a physio, which he did here at Glasgow Caledonian University with an MSc in Rehabilitation Sciences. This coincided with the birth of Lola, who's here today as well. And in the years that followed, he gradually got sucked back into research, becoming fascinated in understanding how to improve population physical activity levels. He went from being a physio to a professor and being recognized as one of the top 1% most cited and impactful researchers in health and social sciences within the last 10 years. That really is an incredible achievement. These days, Seb is internationally recognized as one of the leading researchers in physical activity. And in recent years, he has been part of the expert group, which has developed the UK, Canadian, and World Health Organization's physical activity and sedentary behavior guidelines. Those of us who are a bit older will remember people like the Green Goddess who get you going. Seb isn't that old, but Seb, you are somebody who gets us moving. I'm really pleased that you're here today. You are going to tell us how we can have the perfect day and a time recipe that is good for both you and the planet. Over to you, Seb.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Andrea, for this very kind introduction. I have to say I'm slightly petrified of being here. This is probably the hardest lecture I would have to give because it's such a diverse audience, but also because there are so many of you. And that's not helped by all the help I've been having about how I should put this together, about, yeah, be funny or, just be yourself, be really controversial, or people even daring me to put unholy pictures and words in my presentation. So bearing that in mind, I'll try to please as many people as I possibly can. First of all, I have to say I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for GCU. It's a great place to work. We might be small, but we pack a punch. And our physio department is a second in the UK, first in Scotland. So that gives you a scale of what we do. I have to say we might be smaller, but that means we have to work more creatively, more smartly. So we pack a better pound for the buck, basically, just getting a bit more of it. So if you want better quality research for less money, come to us. But I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for quite a few people. So I'm going to go through a few thank yous. First of all, I have to thank my direct family, Josie and my kids, who are just fabulous. And Josie attracted me to Glasgow quite effectively. And they are a big inspiration. An academic career is stressful. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of time away, and maintaining an actual family, a great family life there at the same time is a real achievement for me. There's also my parents, of course, and my in-laws as well are fabulous. I'm very lucky. I've got a great family. And if I'm a scientist, it's probably because of my mom, who was a microbiology teacher and was the first one to get me peering through a microscope at some weird and wonderful things, doing like experiment by the kitchen sink. So Mom, it's all your fault. So there is before I go into there's also, I want to thank obviously my colleagues, the RGCU, and everybody else. But I've never had, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the Erasmus program, as Andrea said. And I'm so sad that the UK is not part of this anymore, because young British people will not have the chance to go and work and interact with people from around Europe, the chance I had. So that's a terrible, terrible loss. I've never had a mentor, and if you're getting into academic research, I strongly suggest that you get one early, don't leave it too late. But I had a few people that really counted for me. And that's amongst the huge network of people I interact with all the time. That's a visualization of the people I have written papers in the last few years with. I apologize, this beat my data skills. But if you spot your name on there, take a screen grab, and if you can figure out where you are, just tell me and I'll buy you a drink. And amongst these people, there's 3 people that really counted for me and that really helped me along my path. And these are Pete Nino, who's here with us, who's a polar medalist, and who's always been very kind to me, let me cry, moan, whinge, and then look at me, laugh at me, and keep me real all the way through. There's obviously Don Skelton, who's been my closest collaborator at GCU, who's shown me about aging research, but also how to create impact. A bit further afield, I've got my really good friend, Rick Cardon, who's taken me into a group in Ghent, and who I have great fun working with, has shown me how to create a really nice working environment and very effective environment. So thank you to all 3 of you for being there all the time. And then I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all the guys and girls I work with on a daily basis. And I have to single out 2 people, Philippe Adal and Zoe Tigis, who has been with me for a long, long time working on research. And then there's all the PhD students that are working in the 4 main areas in which I work, which is physical activity, system and data science, co-creation, and nature therapy and climate-related things. And interacting with these young and bright people is the biggest pleasure of being at work every day. So thank you very much for your time and teaching me as we go along. And there's obviously the team at Ghent University, which I visit regularly, and they're all fabulous. And I also have to thank all the co-creators. So that's members of the public and policymakers, decision makers that come and do science with us as co-researchers on a daily basis, like the Granston Research Group. And I hope you guys are online. Thank you very much. So yeah, people would have a problem putting me somewhere, and I resist that vehemently, because I am a polymath. That's what I believe I should be. There is definitely a need for people to be specialized. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have a vaccine for COVID, for example. But there is a need for more generalist scientists, but that's not really recognized within the university system. So the path I had to travel was a bit more complicated. But it's a very, very good path to travel. But there is a thread through all this, which is actually, I'm interested in complex systems. In other words, how you have microscopic stuff that interact with each other, and then that emerges into microscopic effects, and that then reflect back onto the microscopic world. And you'll see that all the way through that presentation. So let's track back a little bit. I started with unconventional superconductivity. I was the coolest guy in the UK. I made this machine and I went down to 78 millikelvins. That's almost that's colder than outer space. That's almost absolute zero. And at that level, nothing moves, which is great because you can conduct electricity or information very efficiently without resistance. That's great. And we found out that if you put some impurities into the superconductors, you might raise the temperature at which they are superconductor, which is great. That means we could transmit energy without losing any. So with brute force, I put more and more impurities into these things, but that led us absolutely nowhere. Anyways, it's really frustrating as a scientist when you get nowhere. Yeah, you learn that you're wrong, and that's really annoying. And I wasn't the only one about superconductivity, and a lot of people got pretty desperate. And some Japanese scientists that were working on similar things actually, at the desperation, sent a party together, and they got really drunk. And they put the superconductor in various alcohols. And actually, they found out that these were the best impurity, French red wine being the best. So the first lesson I learned from that as a polymath is Fun is better than brute force. Then I went to do a bit of sustainable transport research in Antarctica. Then I became a space cadet. I worked with satellite data. The problem is, and that's me and Pete in Greenland trying to calibrate one of the satellite craters. The problem is none of them ever made it to the right place. So I lost my job every time. And I learned a lesson though, because on both occasions, it was a problem of communication and around units. So NASA had an engine in metrics, and Lockheed Martin, or the other way, had all the guidance system in imperial. So it's nowhere near where it's supposed to be. So that's lesson number 2. Units and communication are very important. Then I went to do some unconventional geophysics, and I was with a great guy called Stuart Cramp in Edinburgh University, where we actually thought that earthquake all this, it wasn't something very big, but actually it was down to microscopic cracks in the rock, and loose under stress, they kind of align, and the fluid in them just moved from one to another, and when it was not enough alignment, that's when you had an earthquake. The great thing about this is that actually this alignment changed the way seismic wave transmitted through this. So all we needed is a seismic source that we could trigger constantly, put that in the ground several kilometers down the ground in Iceland, and keep triggering it. So that's what I did for 3 years. I keep triggering that thing and listening to it. And we did some great science. We managed to discover like movement of a millimeter of earth, of rock, over hundreds of kilometers. Great success, except nobody took us seriously. Because of the acronym of the project. It was called smsite.net, and it was all about the downhole vibrator. So that's lesson number 3, is choose a good acronym for your project. Anyway, so I became completely tainted for geophysics, and again, I lost my job. But that was a good thing, and I came to GCU retrained to become a physiotherapist. But that's great because, you know, electrons, rocks, when interact with each other at a microscopic level, they do pretty interesting things, but their interactions are rather boring, right? Humans are much more interesting, especially human movements. You know, humans argue with each other, they fall in love, they have sex, they do complicated things. And they also have this thing called willpower, you know? So that makes it much more interesting and complex to get on with. So that's why I got interested in what I call behavior dynamics, and you will not find that anywhere. That I made it up because it just describes what I do, which is essentially studying the narrative of our day. And that's really important because the things we do one after the other is directly related to our health, the health of others, and how we interact with each other, how we age, but also our interaction to all the societal system and our environment. So that narrative is a reflection of what society is like and what we are like with each other. So that's important. And it's not a more interesting time to do this because we have all this cool technology, and I'm sure some of you are wearing it right now, that can actually get some very detailed data and objective data about the narrative of the day and how this unfolds. And we can get into it more and more detail. So the future of my research is pretty cool. I'm gonna have more and more data to play with. So to take you on a journey to the perfect day, I'm going to start to ask you to choose a totem animal. And that totem animal is based on some citizen science we did with colleagues in Ghent. Just choose depending on the amount of time you spend every day sitting and the amount of hours you spend daily exercising. I am definitely a seal. I certainly spend more than 7 hours a day sitting in front of my computer, trying to be clever. And I try to get engaged in 1 hour of physical activity, but I fail regularly. So how many other SEALs do I have in the room? Oh, I'm not on my own. So a perfect day. Well, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to disappoint you. There's no such thing. It's all a matter of balance. And that's what I was trying to get across to you today. But we can make some choices along the way about how we can have more benefits from structuring the cocktail of our day better. So let's start with the first point. We have overwhelming evidence that movement is beneficial for health. Movement is medicine, and inactivity kills you. That is undeniable. And you can see that in a very, very summarized way in this curve here, which is data that was summarized to put together the American physical activity guidelines a few years back, and then subsequently taken into the World Health Organization guidelines. And that is called a dose response curve. It tells you how much of something you do and what is the effect of it, essentially like a drug. So, and we can see that the more physical activity you do, your risk of developing early mortality or cardiovascular disease or any type of chronic diseases actually decreases. And that's true for almost every type of chronic disease and some communicable disease. So it's a real panacea, essentially, physical activity. That's the first thing to notice. The second one is, well, you know, even if you do a lot, it doesn't kill you. So despite what the media are trying to tell us, it's actually a very safe drug. You know, go and enjoy it. And then scientists decide that that area here is the best bang for your buck. So if you do around 30 minutes per day, that's where you'll get the best return for your time investment type of thing. But with the World Health Organization guidelines, put more emphasis on this part here, probably, which is if you start from nothing, that means you're not moving. As soon as you move a little, you're actually gaining very quickly. So it's the importance of starting that is more than anything else. So, and it's clear message, every move counts. And that's really simple. And that's actually beautiful because you'll get yourself down that curve very quickly. If you're physically active 30 minutes a day, it also helps you age more beautifully. For that, we have to, although it might not be the case, you have to add a few ingredients to that, which is to add a bit of strengthening and a bit of balance work, because that keeps your body functioning really nicely, well-oiled, all through your life. And you can see this here. People are physically active at the top. If you're not so physically active, then you will decay with age. But if you start physical activity, you can keep yourself independent, enjoying life for much, much longer. And it's never too late. Those are the key message. 30 minutes and some strengthening activity and some balance. Okay, that's simple, but that's only 23 and a half hours of the day. So what do you do with the rest? You know, there's quite a lot of hours there. And you might have noticed these kind of things happening to your own life. So 30 minutes, if I do it, I probably sleep about 7.5 hours a day. There's very little variation in sleep unless you have real sleep disorder in populations. Then you probably sit 9 hours a day, that's for me, and about 8 hours in front of screens. What does that do to you? And then we probably spend the rest of the day in light activity of daily livings, you know, going shopping, walking around, that kind of thing. What does that do to you? Does that negate the effect of going to the gym or engaging in exercise? And you probably have seen these kind of things that have appeared in the media in the last 10 years, like quite scary messaging around, you know, sitting is the new smoking, it wrecks your body, all this kind of thing. Also, a lot of messaging around you have to get enough sleep, you know, all the time. But is that actually true? Actually, some colleagues in Canada are starting thinking, okay, but we can give people a better recipe, more guidance by combining this thing together. How much time you need to spend sleeping, sitting in front of screens, exercising, walking, that kind of thing. And that was really the first 24-hour movement guidelines, a real recipe for the whole day. But you had one important conceptual flaw, is that the evidence is built on studying each of these behaviors separately. And that's conceptually very wrong. Because if I'm doing more physical activity, then I have to do less sitting and less of something else. All these behaviors are codependent. So we might be double accounting certain things and missing some joint effect. So that's where our group made a real breakthrough and advance in that respect. And it's by the conceptual idea that actually the day is a cocktail. But the cocktail in the glass is fixed. It has a fixed volume, and all we have to do if you want a cocktail to make you more or less drunk or more or less happy, then you have to change the proportion of what's inside. And if you change one proportion, you have to change the other as well. So these are correlated, they are codependent. And it's the same thing as if you think about a plate of food that has different nutrients or a pill that the doctor gives you. And we did a lot of mathematical work based on a great work of John Atkinson, who's a brilliant Scottish statistician. We developed code, we shared them, we trained hundreds of people around the world to use these. And what we found is actually daily physical activity is a perfect composition, because if I have a dish of food, I can change the effect of that dish of food if I eat a bigger plate or a smaller plate. Same thing, I can take a pill that is more strong, or sorry, stronger, or take more pills. But when it comes down to my day, all I can do is change the end, what's inside the day. So we then try to get as much data as possible to try to replicate that curve I showed you at the beginning, but make it a curve for the whole day, for the 24-hour day, looking at what is the dose response between these 4 different behaviors and our health. And that in color, you have the hazard ratio of early mortality, red being increased risk, green being lower risk, and then you have the time in activity and the time in sedentary behavior here. And there's a few things you notice on this. First of all, this blue line here, which is our guideline, 30 minutes. You can see that immediately it doesn't represent the same risk for everybody. In fact, if you're doing extreme amount of sitting, your time exercising doesn't really protect you anymore. The second thing to notice is that this point represent very different compositions, so different recipes of time spent sitting in light activity or exercising, but they have the same level of risk, which means essentially there's more than one way to get to Rome. And that's great because in terms of developing interventions or helping people to be more active, we now have more ammunitions. We can tailor that to people's circumstances and context. And this is your totem animal, depending on where you are on that map. So that helps you orient yourself. The second thing we could do from that is to start developing an alternative recipe, a slightly better recipe, which is really based on this data. We can say, actually, you should be doing 3 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So the kind of thing that gets you slightly out of breath for every hour of sitting you do in a day. Or 21 minutes of light activities. These are the kind of boundaries. And you can see immediately that intensity plays an important role here. It saves you time. Yeah, so more power, less time, that's a good thing. But there's something else in this. In there, I talked about moderate to vigorous physical activity, but there you can do this at work or for leisure. And that has slightly different effect. And if you take the composition of the day and we make more categories as we're getting better data, then we can see that there's a differential effect. It's not the same whether you are doing physical activity for pleasure, that decreases your risk, but if it's physical activity for work, then it increases your risk. So we have to be very careful about what our messaging is and getting into more detail of that daily composition. And that's interesting if we go back in time a little bit, at a moment where really movement and lifestyle science started, because that's Victorian time, where man was a machine taking off the highlands, clearances, chucked into factories, and there was plenty of physical activity. 16 hours a day in the factory, 2 hours walking back and forth, and only 6 hours of free time. And your life expectancy was way below 55 years old for man. But at that time, it's really where we developed a lot of the techniques and the methodology for movement science. You had this discovery of the first law of thermodynamics and this kind of contraction, which we still use nowadays to measure people's energy expenditure, movement analysis, the discovery of fatigue, there's such thing, and the development of factory gymnastic, all this in the name of keeping the human machine working, productive, and for profit. So we have to bear that in mind, specifically when we know that global trends in physical activity are stuck at a level where most of the population is physically inactive, which means they don't meet the recommended guideline for physical activity. Not only they're stuck, but they are really stuck in the sense that they're just not budging despite everything we are doing. And they're really high, to the point that the Lancet calls inactivity a pandemic. And now after COVID, I think we have a good understanding what that means. Yet we don't see anybody being forced to move around. And this pandemic is estimated that it actually causes around 5.3 million deaths per annum. Compare that to COVID as well if you want. And the cost of that is 53 billion worldwide. That's the GDP of Croatia, just to give you a scale. So, and that's really interesting and puzzling because sports participation is going up. not for all sports, not equally, but generally people participate in sports more. So how come the sports is going up? But actually physical activity level are remaining stuck. So we can ask ourselves that question. Well, how to get people moving? And we have really good models as this one, the ecological model of determinants of health that can be applied to physical activity behavior that tells us, well, the personal, interpersonal, or the different level of influence to try to find a silver bullet on which we could act. But when I had a chance to get involved in a really super large program on this pan-European program, and when we looked at all the data we had, we could only explain about 20% of the variance in people's physical activity. That's very little. So finding that silver bullet wasn't that simple. Yet, physicists told us at the same time the limit that human mobility, which is not so far from human movement, is 93% predictable. But it's not a simple linear relationship just as a silver bullet. It's a complex interaction that leads to a lot of diversity and variance in behavior. So that made me think that actually everything we know about behavior is actually only happening in a small portion of our physical activity. The rest, something else is happening, something much more hardwired in our behavior that is much more difficult to shift. And that, I think, my explanation for this is that actually our behavior fundamentally is driven by our limits. And our limits are twofold: how much energy we have and how much time we have. And we have a whole lot of things to do in the middle that are going to compete for that time and that energy. And we get so good at it that to do that, we're emitting tons of CO2. So that is driving climate as well. So time, energy, but if you think about both, you can bring them back together if you think about money, because we exchange time, we exchange energy for money constantly. So is there any kind of evidence that that's the case? So we took the data from DediPack or pan-European data, and we looked at how much we spend time being inactive here and tried to trace all the relationship between all the possible data we had. And what we found out, the closest thing related to being inactive are these ones. The diagram is not terribly good, but all these things, such as my financial burden of being active, our occupation, our wealth, the GDP of our country, that's all related to money and time. If you ask people, so if you go back to qualitative research, and there are 527 reviews, also an Ipsos global survey recently, last year, and the two things that stop people from being active are time and money. So there is something in it. But if there is time and money are so important, therefore, I should find differences in physical activity levels depending on what is a competition for time and money in populations. In other words, in countries where there are more income inequalities, I should see less physical activity. And it's exactly what we noticed here with a paper we did with some Belgian and South African friends, that depending in a middle and high income country, if the country is more unequal, therefore there is less physical activity. And we can make massive gains. It's like 20, 30% in terms of adherence to physical activity guidelines. And it's something that doesn't appear anywhere in our ecological model. But we know from, if you read something like the spirit level, that actually the same effect happened for most health markers. And we know from economics that inequalities are an impossible level that's not been there for centuries. So we might have to address this. So this competition between energy and time is really what drives our behavior. And our behavior fundamentally is bursty. By this, I mean the physicists have looked at it. I've looked at it with some colleagues here at GCU. What we do is we do things and then we procrastinate. You know, we procrastinate a lot to the point that at one point we're going to procrastinate forever. And in between these things, we have to choose what we do. So we think it's to do with the prioritizing tasks in our head, and we only have about 6 tasks in our head. So that's about the times we are not active, but what do we do with the time that is active now? But you can understand that very simply, because if I have 24 hours, I can only watch one 24-hour movie, yeah? So one chance. But I can watch two 12-hour movies or 4 6-hour movies and so on. So probabilities of doing one thing increases the shorter and shorter that thing is. It increases really rapidly as 1/t, yeah? I can do the same reasoning with energy, and it's the same thing. So based on that, I can write a simulation of a human that is very simple about the choice they're making. So we can actually make predictions about this. And that's exactly what we did by a simple model of a human. And we actually noticed that what we predicted works really well with really big data sets, such as the UK Biobank. So we are onto something, and that's work I'm doing with some friends at GYU in Finland. And the result of that is our likelihood of responding to a task. So if I ask you to do me a favor, if it's for a short period of time, you're probably going to say yes. But if I ask you to work for me for the whole day, you might think about it twice. But it actually goes much quicker than this. Actually, as soon as you hit about 5 minutes, your response is going to be like 5%. And the people have understood that really well are the social media, companies. They keep us engaged by asking us to do micro little things. And it works really well for them. But I'm trying to promote a football match. 90 minutes ain't going to happen. And why is it that we are like this? But fundamentally, I think it's to do with our evolution. We are made to move. We're incredibly capable, efficient machine. People do the most amazing feats of physical activity, crossing the Sahara, running 3 days in a row. But the probability of that is very low, and you're not going to do that every day. The reality is we are meant to conserve energy, that we make choices knowing that we have limited energy, limited time. And is there evidence of that? Yes, there's good evidence. And evidence, again, is evolutionary. We are hunter-gatherer fundamentally. And if you are a hunter-gatherer and you want to find sources of energy that are scattered around the world and get there before you've run out of energy and died, the best way to get there is to use this kind of dynamics, something called close to a Levy flight, which is, again, a big burst of energy to get to my source of energy. Then I procrastinate and eat it until it's exhausted. And I'll just make another jump, rather than some random walking trying to find it being lost in the wood. And there are really good evidence around the world that this is the case. We have exactly that mobility pattern, whether you're still working living in a kind of tribal environment, or even in the way we construct cities. So we are very good time and energy efficient thinking machine, optimization machine. And we've done even better, because what we've done in terms of time, we concentrated our resources in places that we know where they are. Yeah. And that saves us time. And then we made our traveling mechanized, which means we save time, we save energy, but then our relationship to energy becomes really bent. And so that's where time we can understand. Energy is much more difficult to understand. So let's put this in numbers and try to understand a little bit how we interact with energy. And it's best done by looking at things in proportions. So our body, it consumes pretty much 800 AA batteries a day, right? So imagine a Duracell bunny, but we are only able to really output about 0.5 kilowatt of brute force every day. And that's when we lived in the fields, survived that way, and our life expectancy was very low. And then came fossil fuel, because in 1 liter of diesel, you have 10 kilowatt, that's 20 times more. And our life expectancy and our quality of life rose massively. In fact, we've become really, really good at exploiting other sources of energy. We've built an exoskeleton around us, yeah, that allows us to impart transformation on the world that I can do from my computer sitting with zero energy expenditure. I can change the world massively. And that has consequences. And actually, the way to fathom these consequences is best put by the SHIFT project led by Jancovici in France, with an NGO that looked at transformation of energy. He calculated how many human slave it would need to maintain my lifestyle in Europe. 600 slaves a day. So that gives you a scale of the hidden cost of our thwarted relationship with energy. And we don't want to go back there. Certainly our life expectancy has gone up, but we don't want to go back there. And we have to think about it, because I can order food and somebody else will do the physical activity and probably paid very little. So we have to be careful about this. And this really fundamental behavior that we can model really, really precisely. Well, look, these are our time use surveys from the UK. Our predictions are pretty much there. Our energy expenditure has gone down. Our sport is pretty much, that fraction due to sport is pretty much the same. The fraction due to commuting is pretty much the same. Our occupational health, our domestic physical activity is pretty much the same. And I have to say that's still sadly mostly women that engage in that. But it's the work part that has disappeared. We certainly don't want to regrow that. Yeah, but you can see, and our sitting has gone up. So we have to be careful about how we promote physical activity in the future. So what are the solutions? We're going to need some drastic and radical social innovation to change this. For sure, and these are going to have to be something to do with giving people more leisure time to be physically active, guaranteed. We're going to have more synergies with climate, something that is intergenerational and much more diverse. It's going to have to be inefficient. We have to let go of this idea of efficiency as much as we possibly can. We have to be much more playful and do that in nature. So for sure, we have to carry on sports, for sure. But the effect of these on population level is still going to be limited, and it probably only benefits the richest amongst us. As you're opposed to that, we can think about this idea of movement snacks being peppered through the day, and Dawn Skelton is doing some of that with older adults. But I've noticed that young children or young adults do the same thing spontaneously. The kind of sports that I've recently are things like skateboarding, kendama, parkour, which are all based on really short bursts of activity and then hanging around with your mate and having a good natter, or looking at, wow, cool, what was my trick? You know, I try to partake on that, except the cool trick bit I never get. Or we can try to transform our environment, such as, you know, the 15-minute city. But I think the 5-minute city or the 3 times 5-minute city would probably be better, because our adherence or the likelihood of us engaging in it is going to be much, much higher. As you can see, this behavior goes down really quickly. So we're going to have to address the elephant in the room, and the thing that we don't like talking about, which is inequalities. Because we know we can make a massive step in terms of physical activity adherence just on that. And that's the reason why I invest so much time in developing co-creation methodologies, because nobody's going to come up for this radical social innovation on their own. We're going to have to put multiple brains together and multiple perspectives to make that work. And how we're going to do this is really important, to ensure there's no biases, to ensure there is not a group that hijack the narrative. And it's also why, with my good friend Gordon, we're developing data for common good. So trying to develop, use the kind of data science that companies or social media companies use to make us consume, to use that for social innovation instead. So that's my take-home message, which is movement behavior essentially is predictive. It follows a very, very, very clear dynamic, and that dynamic is down to time and energy limitation, which sums to money. And it's evolutionary, and it's leading us straight to climate change. And there's not much we can do about that. We'll have to go around it. It's bursty. That means you have a highest adherence for short time demands. Most intervention works against nature, such as sport. You know, they're asking us for big demands. And also promoting sport is about promoting competitions, this competition for resources that drives the whole system. So we might have to do something different. That cannot be solved without solving the gender and income inequality. And at that point, it's very clear. And finally, the fight for climate change, or against climate change, the fight to develop more physical activity promotion, but it's the same thing. There are immense synergies and co-benefits to be gained by joining the two things together. And that's all I have to say. Now you can move. Thank you.
Thank you, Seb. I really, really enjoyed that. And I know we've got some questions already submitted, which I'm going to start off with. And then if you've got any questions, I believe we've got a gentleman with a roving mic at the back. So yes, one of our questions actually was about the way in which we have sustainable movement behaviour that doesn't widen health inequalities, because telling somebody like me who's got enough money to go and do some sport or some physical activity or to buy some time, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have those resources, how do we do that?
Well, in multiple ways, and that's where the social innovation is so important, because the major channel by which we've promoted physical activity has been through sports, essentially. And that's not accessible to everybody, even if we try to make it better and better. The next level is very simple. Walking is a big thing. And then commuting by bicycle, making our environment a lot more conducive to movement. We've developed an environment that's really good at preserving us from expending any energy. So it's about reintroducing that in places. But we can think about many other ways, gardening or getting involved in environmental conservation, in altruistic pursuits. It's every move counts. So it doesn't have to be sports. It doesn't have to be competitive. It's about more movement, but meaningful movement.
I mean, our first inaugural lecture in this series was about movement and sport and some of the barriers around, like sweaty, being a sweaty sports person as opposed to being a commuter. So it's that balance of a perfect day and the sorts of things that might change over your lifetime. Can you give us some thoughts about how you think the cocktail might change from somebody who's young, somebody who's in the prime of their life, like ourselves, and then somebody who's looking forward to that eventual procrastination?
Well, first of all, the kind of activities you get involved in change because you're growing as a human. So you have to go and be curious and do new things and evolve. I was trying to follow my son mountain biking this weekend, and I led to a pretty spectacular crash. And I have a different relationship to risk now, according to that. But interestingly, also our relationship to energy and time changes with aging. So we did a really nice study in Norway, for example, and the Norwegians are never fatigued. They never are. They're machines. But we asked older adults that were fatigued to wear monitors, and people that were not fatigued to wear monitors. And what we saw is a very, very different way of managing that energy. And sometimes it's about understanding that limitations and whether that limitation is real or not, and allowing people to challenge it and constantly challenge these limits in that respect. Young kids do that almost spontaneously, but as we grow older, we have to just constantly keep challenging it.
Right. And some countries have famously revolutionized their attitude to movement and being out and about, like Finland, over the last 20 years or so. Are there things that their approaches actually demonstrate? Some of your positions about, it's about equality, it's about burstiness, it's not about going and having 90 minutes of a football match.
Yeah, in that respect, I had a chance to spend 3 months in Finland this academic year, and it's marked differences. First of all, it's a much more equal society, which means everybody is given time to be active. So the workday is shorter. People respect the fact that, well, you're going to go out, you're going to go and ski for an hour, or they have that chance to have that proximity. But it's ingrained in society that it's not all about being efficient, productive, and making money. It's a much more equalitative, and they are very capable. The economy is working really well. So, but the attitude is entirely different. And it's not all about sports. It's about family time. It's about being intergenerational time. It's about being outside together. It's about the facilities that are there built into the town that allow you to actually move without being run over by a car or this kind of thing.
Yeah. Are there any questions from here? Just don't want to dominate with my questions and those. Yes, so a question in the front. Josie.
Probably should have asked this at home. I'm really curious, as someone who works with governments, how we try and convince governments away from the message that you should get out and do 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes worth of exercise, and how we're trying to encourage them to move towards what you're talking about, which is a complete shift in the way that we deal with sport and activity.
I don't think we need to shift the government away from 20 minutes. It's still the target. 30 minutes is still the target, the optimum target. So we shouldn't say that. But it's not so much the government, it's deeper than this. It's how we structure the workday. What's really interesting is that our schedule is built on that. On 9 o'clock, I do this. At 10 o'clock, I do that. It's very linear. But in fact, our own behavior is completely different. It's based on these bursts. And why are we not allowing ourselves to just work this way much more, and allowing the working day to be broken much more? As an academic, I have a lot more freedom in that respect, but somebody that works behind the till doesn't have that. Somebody that works, in an hospital doesn't have that. So it's recognizing that this is essentially our behavior that drives everything, that drives our productivity, the way we consume energy. And even the physical activity research don't understand it really well, and neither do I really. So it's gonna be a long way before we get to the government, but the target is still 30 minutes.
And there's a question at the front. Okay.
Yeah, so one thing I'm, I guess, concerned about long term is to reduce inequalities. It looks though inequalities are quite linked to money, and money is linked to energy. So we want to reduce inequalities, but to do that, it probably ends up needing more energy to raise people out of poverty. For sort of climate, that seems a real difficult balance to, how can you do that and still save the climate?
Well, first of all, reducing the inequality doesn't mean that actually raising everybody's up, but it's also bringing some people down. Let's be very clear about who's emitting the most. The 1% richest in the world emit 40% of our emissions. So if we sort those guys out, if we took all their money, we probably, could share it around a bit more, and that would probably solve both. And that, so we should look at the problem that way of necessarily inequalities. Reducing inequalities needed more resources, but it's about sharing these resources more effectively. And I think there's plenty going around. We've never been so wealthy. So I don't think we need more. We just need to share it.
Revolution.
So the leveling up agenda is quite an interesting one. Whenever you think, oh well, does everybody get that bounce, or to some people, as you say, the top 1%, maybe that includes some of us, have to change our ways?
Wow.
I don't know.
I'm going to climb the ladders a bit more.
Globally, who is in the top 1%?
Top 1% is this big industrials and social media companies.
Okay.
Yeah. Top
1%
bankers.
That, we'll come back to that one. That would be good. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the world of work. And one of them was about the small fixes that we can do, like standing desks, treadmills on our desks, things that make us, the Pomodoro technique that make you stop after 20 minutes and go and do something else, for goodness sake, rather than getting stuck there forever. Are those the sorts of things that we should be building into our day for the perfect cocktail?
Yeah, absolutely. Just the idea of like shorter burst of activity, intense, and then having the time to relax and do something else, go for a walk, to chat with a colleague. That certainly is the case, but a reduction in working time, allowing for more leisure time, is also not a bad idea.
Yeah. Okay. And have we got any questions that we want to bring from the? Thank you.
So Aga Online has asked, if I understood correctly, movement at leisure is more beneficial for health than movement at work. What if someone really enjoys their work and hates the gym? What makes the work movement different to leisure movement?
Yep, there's always going to be an exception. So first of all, the data showed are global data, so they are not individual data. And of course, you can tune this to one's own context and desires. Enjoyment, happiness is a massive driver of health. Yeah, and it probably is a better driver than physical activity. As a matter of fact, probably physical activity is a stress reducer and this makes you happy. So keep on being happy in that respect. I mean, and you don't have to go to the gym once more. You know, you can go for a walk with your family, play with your children, dance in the living room. There are many, many other ways to actually move than just going to the gym.
Yes, please. Yes.
So I'm getting a few here. So I'm not sure of the name of this person, but leisure time spent with screens and procrastination can be something that needs to be reduced to increase the leisure time that's available. Are there any researchers in that direction?
I don't know of this, and it's always been an issue when we try to develop interventions in the workplace, where we're trying to change the working of the workplace through co-creation. The overwhelming anxiety of the managers and of the business owners is like, oh, is my productivity going to go down? And it's really, productivity is quite hard to measure. So I don't know specifically of this idea of procrastination, but there's a whole lot of people are thinking that actually being quite idle for quite some time is actually a good idea, because it makes you more productive at the end, because you're more relaxed, you can engage in things. Of course, it depends on the task you have to do. If it's a repetitive manual task, well, yeah, you have to do that. But I don't know specifically of research on that.
And I've got one last question, which has come from Gladys and Femi. How do you combine your interests with your academic achievements? Because it's clear that you do manage to bring both of those together.
Yeah, it's a bit like the Miss World kind of question. Why do you do that? Of course, it's for saving the world. No, it isn't. It's just well, I just like to contribute a little bit if I can, but it's just pure curiosity. Mm-hmm. It's just this flame for life and curiosity, being curious all the time, trying to understand and knowing that knowledge is not seated in one place. It's actually, you need to look at it from multiple perspectives to actually get somewhere better.
Thank you very much, Seb. Now, before we finish, just to let you know that if you're joining us online, the chat room is going to stay open so that you can put messages in the chat, etc., comments, observations. So don't worry that when we finish here and get up and go for an orange juice next door, the Zoom will stay on. But I wanted to summarize, Seb, and thank you. We have learned you get a mentor early. Yep. Humans are more interesting than rocks.
Yes.
And that fun is more important than brute force.
Correct.
You've developed this field of behavior dynamics. And I really like that idea of owning the field that you're in and giving it a label that suits you. But you said it was all about balance, because you're balancing that time and the energy. But you've taken us into a bit of politics with levelling up, social marketing, economics, town planning, being the coolest guy in the room with your cold laser physics, etc. And you've brought us back to really thinking about our behaviour and the role that our behaviour plays, not only in contributing to our health, but in the use of fossil fuels, the health of the planet. So thank you very much, Seb. Thank you.
Thank you.